When it comes to the open source ecosystem, it's one thing that your company is succeeding and doing all the right things, but others in the ecosystem have to be able to succeed as well for the whole thing to work.
Hmm.
There are more and more OSPOs popping up. I've seen you around in conferences as well. So I assume that you also keep in touch with other people in other OSPOs.
Hmm.
Do you have any experience in terms of like talking about the struggles of how to justify the value of both the OSPO as well as people working upstream, starting the conversations around at some point we all just have to talk about money. And when it comes to money here, we are really talking about the value of, the open source work, this whole mainstream software development phenomenon that's happening these days. Do you have experience with that?
Experience with like helping people start the conversation with their companies around it.
Yes, and just talking to other people in other OSPOs and sharing this experience of this is how we are justifying our value and worth of this organization within our company and what others are doing in the same space.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, over the last year, I've been on a mission to kind of proselytize what we've been doing in our OSPO and just trying to share that this is a model that has been working for us, hoping that other OSPOs can take something useful away from how we talk about it, how we justify the value, how we present the value to the company. And that's the premise for why we started talking was that I really wanted to talk about this aspect with more and more people. It, as I said at some point earlier, there's so much value in open source. It pains me that we don't talk about it more directly, more often. And so as I say, I'm just been on a kick to try and help people start that conversation to think about the real world value that they are bringing to their companies, because I can only imagine it's huge. And they just might not be speaking about it yet. So yeah, that's why I'm here. It's why I'm headed to the Open Source Summit to find more of those people and to bore them to tears with my financial open source ideas and yeah, that kind of a thing.
Are people mostly receptive?
Yes. Well, there've been a couple of places where I was interested to find that the value that companies saw in open source was different from the where we are. Notably, I was talking with Dawn Foster at VMware, and she was saying that they focus on innovation as the driver for their open source initiatives, and as opposed to like me trying to equate it directly to money as soon as I can. And I thought that was really valuable too. They see the value in that. At some level, they can equate that value of innovation to the eventual products that they create, so that they see the value in a different way. But at least they're equating what they're doing to real world value at some level. However they get to it's fine by me. But I'm just pleased that they do it and they have a slightly different model than us. So mostly receptive. I think actually more than receptive. The last Open Source Summit, there were lots of people desirous of the information of how do we justify what we're doing. Because of that point, there was a lot of pressure on a lot of OSPOs to justify what they're doing. And so, yeah, more than just receptive, I think, yeah, being pulled into conversations around that. Curious whether, I mean, is your experience like mine? Are you seeing a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to communicate the value of what they're doing?
I've personally found that it's a never-ending job. It's a
Yeah.
never, usually because again, I've got experience both with small startups as well as large organizations, and certainly in large organizations, You get everybody educated and everybody's good, and then management shuffles. And so then you have to start the educational process again, because it's a very small percentage that understand, and you have those conversations. And they always come in with a preconceived notion of, well, how do you make money on open source? It's almost always the opening statement. And it's, you don't make money, you save money. This is how you save money. So,
yeah, that's a really good point. We've seen in a couple of places where management at the top has changed, and all of a sudden the stance on open source has changed. The advocate for the open source program office has left, and and the open source program office is left at sea, not being able to justify what they're doing. And that's exactly the place where I'd like to make sure that we all, as open source program officers, are thinking about insulating ourselves or ensuring that more of the company understands what we do, not just the single advocate at the top. And that goes for not just OSPOs, but whatever you're doing, it's better to have more advocates than just one. So yeah, I've seen that in a number of places.
What I've seen in the past is, well, one example of the C-level management saying that, yes, the company is doing open source. Open source is great. They're saying all the right things. And then you have the engineers on the bottom level who are like, oh yeah, I'm so happy. I want to work on open source stuff. And now I can. Mostly, somewhat. And then you get the middle layer management who gets the customer first. The product has to make it out of the door. And that's where the whole thing just breaks. Because figuring out how to do open source as part of product development, I think that is still a nut that's being cracked. Some companies are doing better at figuring out how to navigate things, and there are others who just feel overwhelmed.